episode of TMVTV. Um, I'm really proud today to be joined by Michael Lavlet and soon to be also Almas to discuss the incredible success recently of the Preston independence and also the wider context in which it has happened with the historical rise of reform up north, down south, across the whole of England, essentially. So before we get underway and discuss reform and kind of the more scary aspect of this work, just tell us how you felt last week as you pushed the council and won 3 seats as a Preston Independence group.
Yeah, so tired because we've been campaigning for 4 weeks, and then nervous when you go into the count. I don't know if people have been to a count before, but they are kind of organised chaos, because the first thing that happens is that they empty all the boxes. So each polling station has a box and a box number, and they empty all the votes. And they don't separate them into candidates. They put them into pile of tens because they have to make sure that the number of ballots matches what they've got on their record. So at that stage, you're trying to count, and you can watch it, but you're trying to count, like, for every 10 votes, how many are we getting, how many are Reform getting? You run out of hands, and I think when we were doing that, it was becoming clear that in the division that I was standing, we were doing really very strongly. In the division where Yusuf was standing, it really was neck and neck with Labour. And in the division where Almas was standing, we had a 3-way fight because there was Labour, Reform and us. They then verify the numbers. They then start to go through all those bundles of 10 and put them into piles for each candidate. And for me, it was quite relaxing because one table were my votes and the other table was all the other parties together. So I started to feel relatively confident. But in Almas, who is just joining us just now, so in Almas's ward, it was very, very...
Hello. Apologies. Hi. The wonders of traffic.
So I was just saying, and when Almas was the count, it was very nerve-wracking because we were swinging back and forward. Mm-hmm. When they opened one box, it was very, very strong for Reform, and we opened another one, it was very, very strong for us in the different parts. And then the same with Yusuf, and then it takes a long time. So we started at 10 o'clock and it was very, very long. And then suddenly at 2 o'clock, it's result. And we were just absolutely ecstatic to get 3. Probably when we stood, Almas can tell you in a minute, but Almas has been making fun of me all weekend because she says that I told her, please stand because you won't win.
You won't win, yeah. That's what he was told by John Rees so many years ago, and then he played the same tactic with me. And then look at us now. I mean, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
So we I promised her she wouldn't win, and she did win, but we were all absolutely ecstatic that she did. And then the final thing, was Preston sent 9 councillors to Lancashire County Division. So and it's the equivalent of probably 1.5 to 2 parliamentary constituencies. So 9 people get returned in that area, and we took 3. So we got returned for a third of the 1.5 political constituencies. The Lib Dems got 3, Conservatives got none, Reform unfortunately got 2, but Labour, who are dominant in the city, were reduced to 1 seat. So in that sense, Preston was also quite out of sync with what was happening across the rest of Lancashire and the rest of the country, because not only had we 3 managed to beat Labour in very, very safely Labour seats, but we'd also managed to block Reform. So it was very, satisfying that we'd managed that as well.
Yeah, I was just asking Michael about how he was feeling, but based on the recent results, but also your ability to defeat not only Labour but Reform in an area where Reform did hugely well. What lessons do you think that other groups can take from your victory?
Yeah,
I mean, the fact that small campaigns and small grassroots, community-led campaigns can really make a massive difference. So Preston is quite unique in the sense that we have a very strong pro-Palestine, backing, much to the efforts of Michael Lavlet over here, but on a wider scale as well. And because of that, all the demonstrations and all the different things that we've been doing in Preston, we've had such a good response with the community as well. And it's been a really good way into actually engaging people with politics who might not normally be, engaged, like the Muslim community, for example. I grew up in a slightly apathetic family as well, but we were always geared towards Labour. Labour was like the safe bet for my Muslim family and, the wider community in a sense. It was for the working man. It was for, for us basically. But I think there has been a massive shift with everything that's going on politically worldwide as well. And people are becoming a bit more politically astute. So, it's just about focusing on what the issues are in your local area and really trying to engage with the community on those as well as the wider issues in the world.
I think there can be. I think that's absolutely right. But I think there's a kind of trick for others. The danger is that we only focus on what's happening locally, in the sense that we only say that we'll clean the roads better than them, or we'll pick up the rubbish better than them. Now, having dirty streets and rubbish is really important to people, and we have to do that. Mm-hmm. But it's about integrating both the local, the national, and the international. So, and at all times making a link, and there is a link between lack of local government services and the choices that are made by the Labour government, the choices that are made at the local government around welfare, and at the same time, because they tell us there's no money, but at the same time they can spend an absolute fortune on warfare, both in Ukraine and the Middle East. So all the time there is a link between the local, the national, and the international. And one of the dangers, I think, is that some people think, let's ignore that and concentrate on that. You have to take all three together. And then the second thing I would say is that I know, in the general election, I do think that the support that Muslim Vote gave to my candidacy was really important across the constituency. But we didn't just stick in Muslim communities. And I'm sure it is the case that the majority of use of AMIS in my vote comes from the Muslim community, but it's not 100%. We have broken into white communities as well. And of course, in many parts of the country, it's about building together an alliance and a bloc of the Muslim community, the anti-war white community, the trade unions, the community activists, because we want to represent all our communities in that way, in a way which is pro-Palestine, anti-war, pro-welfare, pro-locality and community, and it confronts things like racism and Islamophobia and those things that are there to divide us. So the trick, if you like, is to try and merge those into a usable block.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there was this kind of this myth going around at the general election that, Muslim Vote was there only to Muslim candidates, or Muslim Vote was there only to engage. Well, we were there to engage the Muslim community. There's no denying that, but only to represent Muslim issues. Austerity impacts everyone, right? Lack of public services impacts everyone. These were the primary issues that we were campaigning, and obviously we were very happy and proud to support Michael's campaign. And I think what's really important here, Michael, is you've kind of flagged the importance of building this coalition that we need to stitch together, and we have about 4 years, because the projections shown yesterday by the BBC suggest that Reform can come up with a majority in the next 3-4 years. How do you think that we as a movement, right, whether it be the left, trade unions, anti-war movement, Greens, how do you think we can respond and create a national movement powerful enough to push back against the narratives of reform, whilst also pushing back against austerity and the harmful, cuts to pays on personal independence or child benefits, etc.
Okay, I'll go first, and then I was this time round. So, two things in that. First of all, I think that the task is urgent to do so. The longer that we leave, so we can't wait till 4 weeks before the next general election before we all start to talk about what this coalition would look like. We have to put down roots. We have to put down roots in our communities, and we have to start that process as early as we can to give ourselves as long a lead as we can. But the task is difficult. The task is big. But one of the things I think that that we should take some I think hope from is that, in my opinion, the reform vote was horrible and worrying and something that we didn't want to see. But we should not dismiss everybody who voted reform as dyed in the wool, can't be pulled back, far right activists or what, because they're not. The vast majority of those people who voted reform, I think, are confused. They're absolutely hostile to the main political parties and what we've been through in the last 20 years. And they're looking for an alternative. And they think that Nigel Farage is the alternative. I think he isn't. And we've got to prove in Preston Independence and other networks across the country that we are better at being the anti-establishment, anti-austerity, pro-Palestine voice, and we don't let people go to reform. So I want to fight for every single vote that reform got. I don't want to ignore them. I don't want to dismiss them. I think we should go out and see them as potentially winnable. But to do that, you need that party. And to do that, you need some consistency. And to do that, we need the best people in all our communities who are recognised as being the best people to fight for what our communities stand for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'd just like to reiterate what Michael said as well. It's vilifying the people who have voted for reform is not the way to go. We need to really just basically, we think that reform is made up of a few different types of people. And there are, the far right, unfortunately, that will be part of that. But on the other side of it, there are people who are just completely disillusioned with the whole political system. So even just getting out on the streets whilst we were campaigning, speaking to white voters as well in my constituency, who might have gone that way, just from having those conversations and really listening to them and showing what we have in common, it really brought them round. So I do think if we focus more on that, we are going to get more people who voted reform out of almost like protest, to be honest with you, back to our side of thinking. They just feel like there's no other alternative. So if we can scale what we did in Preston nationally, that'd be amazing, just to bring people back.
Yeah, and I really don't like asking these questions normally, but it's because it's a topic that comes up again and again for me, which is, as when we try to encourage Muslims to stand for election or parliament, people who are really involved in their community, right, and especially young Muslim women who wear hijab, or sometimes we might wear a niqab, right, or like a face veil, and they're really reluctant because they know kind of they're expecting a level of vitriol and hate. How do you think we can go about and persuade them that, look, you have the ability, the know-how, and also part of your civic obligation too, if you're the right person, to stand up for a better society and stand as a councillor or as an MP.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. Even you can ask Michael as well. Over the last year, since the general election, he approached me a few times, and I was reluctant, and I would just laugh it off if anything. But it's tapping into that complete. I just felt like I'd had enough, and there was nothing. There was something else that needed to change, basically. And I am just a normal person. I'm not someone who comes from a politics background. Just someone who is community minded. I try to work in my communities and really, engage with the local youth as well in the local youth club that I help to run. And it's just about being a face that can be relatable. So hopefully, I'm hoping just by me standing and showing that you can be a regular person, just who has that drive in order to actually change society, and hopefully be in a position of power that can actually make that change and show people that, look, you don't need to be someone who is on some grand level to be able to make this change or be able to fill these spaces. And if we don't take the spaces, then who will? And if we don't take the spaces, how will we affect change in society? So I'm really hoping that even just being a face can help people. I'm going to try and get out into the communities wherever I can speak, wherever I can engage the local youth. There is a lot of interest in local politics and in national politics within the youth nowadays compared to previous generations, which is really, you know, it gives you hope. But it's about getting that level of study, so studying politics and actually putting that into action. So I'm really hoping that I'm hopeful for the future. It can be worrying, and you know, I have thought about it myself, and you know, for my family's sake and everything. But I'm just hoping that just by being a voice and keeping level-headed and not letting any kind of vitriol affecting, you know, aimed at me, put me off, because that's not the goal. You know, we've got to keep our heads up, held high, and not sink to any level. So I'm really hoping that, you know, with Michael and Yusuf's know-how and their experience, we can navigate it in a way that is, you know, hopefully good.
And can I just say, I mean, I probably shouldn't speak on this question, but let me just say that Amos is far too modest, right? She was embedded in the Palestine movement. She's organised things. She's quite well known across Preston, and she's always in the coach down at the national demonstrations. And then to put some pressure on her as well, I actually think she's got a really significant role, because she's the first hijabi to be elected from Preston ever. Right, that's a disgrace. That should not be the case, that we're in 2025 and that's the case. So she can become a fantastic role model for all our sisters right across Preston. And if there's any who are watching, you know, they should come and join us. We've got other elections coming up in the next few years. It would be fantastic to have lots of young Muslim women wearing the hijab, representing Preston independence. But nothing better.
Brilliant, yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, it is a brave step to take. I remember when I first got into politics and I went out to like canvass for the Labour Party during Corbyn's time. I used to hate it because this was just post COVID, Brexit time, and you know, you'd get the odd people at the door, you know, racially, like, you know, they would actually racially abuse you to your face, but they make comments which make you like deeply uncomfortable. And I mean, even during the last general election, when I was canvassing for one candidate, someone started arguing me that NHS workers are too lazy, and you just have to sit there. And you know, yeah, it was strange. Like, he was talking about immigration, and we got into NHS, and yeah, he told me that NHS workers aren't working properly. That's why the NHS is failing. But you do have to build up that kind of resilience, and unfortunately, there are people who come under increased scrutiny in politics, and you know, but you want to be the curators and the tellers of your own narratives. You don't want others telling your stories. So, you know, you're going into local council. What kind of change do you want to see in Preston? Obviously, you won't, you know, you're going to be a minority party there, but what kind of change do you think that can be made, and positive impact, positive that could be made in Preston Council at a local level, and how much of it do you think is dictated by just levels of funding that the Labour Party are not releasing to local governments?
So I think there's two parts of this. So so just to explain to people who might not understand, we live in Preston. We have a Preston City Council, and probably most people in Preston think that that is the council. But Preston City Council is actually only a district level, so it's in charge of things like bins and the parks and cleaning up rubbish in the streets. Lancashire County Council, probably most people in Preston don't identify with, but it's the more important of the two, because it's in charge of things like pensions for local government workers, health and social care, disability, social care for older people, children, people with disabilities. Your schools, the education is Lancashire County Council. So many of the things that people come in contact with on a day-to-day basis are probably Lancashire County, where we are, rather than Preston City Council, although most people identify with that. So that's a little bit strange in how we work that, and we have people coming up to us saying, can you do something about that? And we'll try and raise it as much as possible, but that's actually a Preston City Council task. So we need to manage that a little bit. The second thing is, of course, that the disaster of last Thursday, although we are very excited about what happened to us, the disaster in Lancashire was that 53 of the 84 councillors returned were from reform. So in one sense, it doesn't matter what any of the opposition do. So whether that's the 7 independents, because there's the 3 in Preston and 4 from elsewhere, so we'll be sitting as a block of 7, the 5 Greens, the 5 Labour, the 5 Lib Dems or the 10 Tories. It doesn't matter what any of them do in a sense, because Reform have got such a huge majority, they can push that through. But I also think that the Reform councillors are probably quite divided amongst themselves, and hopefully we can drive a wedge into those divisions and cause splits and all those kind of things. But it will be difficult to bring about policy change at Lancashire County Council, just given the weight of numbers. So what we've got to do then, I think, is to speak out on behalf of our communities, whether they're under attack from Reform or the National Labour government, to demand more resources into our areas. The 3 areas that we represent in Preston, Yusuf, Almas and myself, are the 3 poorest areas in Preston. So we want more resources in. We demand that those resources go into our communities. And we will make as much noise as we possibly can. Evidence will be produced to show that we deserve more. But of course, we are banging our head, if you like, against a Reform and a Labour brick wall. But that's a part of our responsibility. And then the other thing is to represent people at an individual level, because people might have all sorts of issues that they want to take up. And our job is to be, I've used a phrase before, if people were at work, they might know that if they're in a trade union, you have a shop steward who sort of represents you at local level. I think our role is as a community shop steward. We've got to represent people when they come to us, because they want somebody to speak out on their behalf, and that's part of our job as well. So we'll try and do those things. It won't be straightforward, given national government and Reform's control of Lancashire County Council, but we're confident that we can be seen, that we can be part of the communities, and hopefully we can be part of defending those communities and advocating for the kind of policies that are needed to address the social issues in our divisions.
Yeah, Mark, I actually want to get Almas's thoughts on a conversation we were having just before we turned the live on, which was, okay, we understand that Reform are far right force, that they're toxic, and this is nothing to do with their voters. Like we've emphasized time and time again, their frustrations and are totally understandable. But how much of that blame do we lie at Reform and Nigel Farage for stoking up further division, and how much of it do we lie at successive Labour and Conservative governments for failing to raise the living standards of ordinary people? My generation, and now it's yours, probably yours as well, as first generation, are going to end up poorer than their parents. So how much, where do we lay this responsibility, and how do you think we can, and taking that into account, how do you think we can challenge it?
Yeah, it's so true. To be honest with you, yeah, like we were saying earlier, it is because of the successive governments that have been before us. Like, the only reason people have tried to find a different route is because they've just not got anywhere with this government that is in power at the moment, and the Tory government beforehand. We've run things into the ground to the point where people find that there's no other alternative. So like we said, it's not just putting all the blame on the Reform voters and blaming Reform as they are. Obviously it is a toxic party, and Nigel Farage, nobody wants that, but it's about bringing people back around, because we've all become very, very just apathetic to the whole political system. It's just disappointment after disappointment, and it feels like Labour aren't budging. No matter how much pressure we're putting on them, there's no kind of room for them to actually bring it back to what the people want. So until they make a change, it's going to be very difficult with Reform's rise, unfortunately. But I think on local levels, we do need to try and bring the people back around. If we're not careful, we might be headed towards, Reform being the next party in, but we don't want to get to that point. Like Michael said, we have to start now, but we can't wait until the next general election. We can't wait 15 minutes before, because that's just not how it works. People want a change now. So we really, really need to organise, basically.
I suppose from my point of view, I'm a lot older than both of you, but if I think about my lifetime, my grandparents used to say that however difficult their life was, in the interwar years and the unemployment and the whole of that time, at least life would be better for their children. So that was my mum and dad. And my mum and dad used to say, you know, we've had it better than my parents, and it will be better for you. That was my generation. And I probably was lucky in that way. But if I think about my children, there's absolutely no way that I can say that I am confident that my children's life will be better than mine. You know, they don't have the certainties of the welfare state or the pension, or they can't afford the house, and you know they don't have the relative incomes in that regard. So the first thing I think to understand is that for the last 25, 30 years, there has been increasing inequality. There has been the erosion of our welfare services. There's been the erosion of our ability to buy houses and all pensions, have a proper retirement. And the governments have turned against us in that way. Now, they tell us that's because we just can't afford it anymore. Actually, we're the sixth richest country in the world. You know, we have got huge resources in Britain. It's just that what we have chosen to do, or what our governments have chosen to do, is to enrich a tiny, tiny minority at the very, very top whose wealth is off the scale now in a way that it wasn't 20, 25 years ago. And for the vast majority of us, every single day is a struggle to pay the bills, to pay the rent, to pay the mortgage. Those things aren't natural. Those are about government choices. It's about the choices that both Conservative and Labour government have made. But when people say, well, you know, you want to put more money into the NHS, you want to put more money, you want to give winter fuel allowance to pensioners, you want to make sure that people with disabilities have benefits, we can afford to do all that. Even Stammer said, we can't afford to do that, but do you know what? We can increase the defence budget and we can give money, billions of pounds, to Ukraine to conduct a meat grinder war in Eastern Europe. It's always about choices, and we've got to bring that back, that we can have choices, we can have a better life, we can make things better for ordinary people, and it's people like us who will bring that. And what Reform are doing is saying, yes, your life's a lot worse than it was. Do you know who's to blame? Not the tiny minority at the top, it's the people who are coming over in boats. That's not the case at all, right? And we have to address that, and we have to work in our communities for a more resilient and confident response which says it's time to put people before profit and put people first.
Yeah, I think that this is the big lesson from Europe, really. Where the most classical example is France, right? Where to face down the far right, Le Pen, they didn't go to the center or back to Macron. It was a left-wing coalition, right? And it wasn't just one, and it was a very massive coalition from communists to social democrats, but it was a left-wing coalition that were like, we will provide you a real alternative, that was ultimately responsible for keeping them out of power. If we look at Portugal and Spain, where there are now left-wing governments in power, who have taken quite good and decisive action over Palestine in comparison to most of Europe, right? These are methods and ways we have seen where we can break it. So just my last question to you guys is, I find Preston to be incredibly unique. Where we saw the collapse of the Labour vote, in many areas, you would see this kind of stark distinction where votes to independents, the decrease in the vote of Labour would be in line with the percentage of the Muslim vote, and then Conservatives would be. But Preston was the huge exception, right? Preston's Muslim percentage is about 12-13%, and Michael, yourself, you won 22% of the vote. It's an incredible success story, and it's the one that I always tell people about. Like, this is how we build. Preston has the source to build a coalition, and obviously there's a historical council, and there's a strong tradition in Preston of left-wing MPs and councils. But how do you think? What lessons can we pick up from Preston to take to the rest of the country and say, look, we can build successful coalitions where we build together multicultural, multi-generational coalitions to challenge reform, challenge Labour, and just challenge the status quo to build a better country?
I'll go first.
Yeah, you go first.
So look, I think you find people with a lot of different strategies, and I think there are some that clearly we need to avoid, and that is, there's lots of really good people. I don't mean to denigrate them, But if you sit in a small room or a relatively small room and you put together a programme and you think, I've got a programme now, I'm going to go out and tell everybody to vote, the evidence is they don't vote for you. Policies are important, absolutely. But what's more important is that you're talking to people, that you relate to people in the language that they understand, and that you're embedded in the campaigns locally and known in the campaigns as somebody who can be trusted. Almost is somebody who's got a history in the community organisation and volunteering and is trusted. Yusuf resigned from the Labour Party over the question of Palestine and is trusted. I was the person who was identified with the Palestine movement a lot in Palestine and was trusted in that sense. And then it's about the other things that we bring. So, yep, Almas and Yusuf are from the Muslim community. I have got a trade union background. We merge those things together and we try to build that coalition locally together, looking not at what divides us, but at what unites us. Mm-hmm. You know, too many people want to start off and say, well, if I look at it, I agree with Abu Bakr about an awful lot, but I'm going to find something that we can have a fight about. Mm-hmm. And then they split on that basis. For the vast majority of us, for 70% or 75% of what we think, we agree. Most of the British public thinks we should put more money into the NHS. Most of the British public thinks we should nationalise the railways. Most of the British public think we should nationalise the waters because they're an absolute, the waterways are a disgrace and the sewage systems are there. Most of the British public think we should put more money into schools. Let's think about what brings us together, whether we are Muslim, Christian, trade unionist, Hindu, Sikh, whatever it is. Most of us agree with those things, and that should be our starting point to say this is at the heart, this is at the core of what we want in a better world.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree with Michael. He's basically said it all. Yeah, it was our differences as a 3 and 4 with Emma Mead as well, independent candidates, that brought us all together because we all had a common goal to try and, you know, make our community a better place. But it was our different backgrounds that people could relate to. If someone couldn't relate to Michael, they could relate to me. If they couldn't relate to me, they could relate to Michael. And one of the things that was so inspiring is when we were going out campaigning, I voted for Michael last year at the general elections. And then I would say, well, if you trust Michael, then you can trust me, because we're all, yes, we might be independent, but we're all looking at a common goal. A vote for him is a vote for me, and vice versa. And we really built a strong platform like that. We were a united front. And it's about identifying those pillars in your community. So wherever you are in the country watching, if you can identify those people that people look to and trust and actually can see a hope for a better future in, then try. You know, there's no harm in trying, and really try to find the things that unite you, basically. And honestly, just speak to people where they're at. That's the main thing. That's what I did. That's what Michael did. That's what Yusuf did. And somehow it was the winning ticket.
And I think just the final thing as well is that, you know, one of the really positive things, one of the things that I think is really quite exciting now is that Almas's division and my division are right next to each other. There's you would need a PhD in graphic design or engineering to work out how they've split that up. So even single streets sometimes are mine, sometimes are Almas's. It doesn't make any sense. But because we're both elected, actually, we can run it as one really, really big ward. So, for example, if there are sisters groups in my division and they want somebody to come and talk about that, but they would prefer a woman to come and do it, that's Almas's job. Yeah. And if there's somebody in Almas's who would rather have a man talking to a man's group, then that's my job. And we'll just work this together. We shouldn't have divisions between electoral areas or whatever. So we're now in a situation where we've got 3 people who will work right across this area with a vision of trying to represent people, speak up for people, and drive our vote even deeper into the communities, no matter what your background is. And whether you voted for us or not, we will represent you, because if you didn't vote for us last time, we want to, you know, convince you to vote for us next time. And if you did vote for us this time, we're aware that you only lent us your votes. So you lent us your votes this time. We want to prove through practice that it was worthwhile lending them, and we want you to give us them next time as well.
Yeah, we want to earn them.
Thank you very much, both. I think we'll conclude there. But yeah, it is a huge lesson to learn from you guys, and hopefully we can take those lessons, spread them around the country, and really make a country that works for all. And I just like to conclude on that message really, that look, we are called the Muslim vote, and like I said, I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to apologize for that. But we believe that the power of the Muslim vote can be mobilized for the good of everyone in this country. You know, you talked about poverty. Like it's probably the biggest issue. 1 million more Muslims live in poverty in the year 2021 compared to the last census of 2011. That's a stark number, right? And that's not just across the Muslim community. That's probably across the whole country. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are living in poverty now that weren't living in that 10, 15 years ago. And that's because of the agenda, the austerity, the funneling money up to the rich. And you know, I do believe, and I think Palestine was the moment that exposed that all. And I do think that we can truly make a huge difference, and create a society that works for all. Actually, we have some comments. Do you guys have a minute?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, like, these are really important comments, right? So someone's talked about private sector accountable when they're profiteering from government contracts. Is really important in local councils or county councils. Is this something that you're going to try and focus on?
So look, first of all, I think those are very, very important. I mean, in general terms, my view, Amos might have a slightly different view, but in general terms, my view is that we should bring things back in-house. Now, people might say, well, why? Surely you want the best. The reason, if they're brought back in-house, if they're brought back under the control of your local government, or under control of the NHS, under control, is that you have some democratic accountability, and they're not driven by the profit motive, because they don't have the bottom line for the directors. They're driven by our duty and our public responsibility. We've lost the whole ethos of public service and public accountability in Britain, and I think we need to bring that back. So in general terms, I'm against outsourcing, privatisation. They should be brought back in-house. The profit motive should be taken, and the motive of service should be service to communities.
I agree with that.
Another favourite of mine, having worked in a council for a brief period, someone's commented on basically talk about the importance of highways and the importance of city centres. I've been having a discussion recently with a councillor, and I was asking him, look, we have pension funds which are worth in the hundreds of millions in local areas. And 70% of UK capital, I believe, flows into the American stock market, which is making Apple richer, or I don't know, because there's this fiduciary responsibility. And I asked him, like, why can't you get that money and give it as low interest, or loans or bonds to businesses to build business in the city centre? He said, yeah, because the return on investments aren't enough. And I said, the return on investment is you have a nice city centre. But apparently, legally, it is quite difficult. But public transport in particular, what is the situation like in Lancashire and Preston in particular? And do you think that this also is an area where the government's had a big focus on net zero, and then still, especially in areas outside of London, Birmingham, maybe Manchester, people are forced to use cars? Is that still the case in Preston, or do you think that the investment there has been right?
I mean, yeah, no, you're right. In our city centres, if you just come to Preston, you can see there's hardly any shops open. All the restaurants it's becoming mostly food places, and then a lot of them are shutting down just purely because they can't afford it, because what the council has done has made it so inaccessible to get to the town centre that people are just not turning up, and it's there's so much potential there. And they're putting in extra bus gates, and it's baffling, honestly. We should be making a town centre that is more accessible to people rather than driving them away. And unfortunately, the funding just isn't there. Like you said, with local businesses, there's no incentive to open actual businesses, because people don't think that people are going to even come into the businesses and spend money. So it's just it's a bit of a catch-22 at the moment. So this is something that we're going to look into, hopefully.
And on the question of public transport, you're absolutely right. I'll give two examples because sometimes people say when you talk about integrated transport systems, oh, here you are, here's the left, whatever. I a few years ago, my daughter lives in Australia, and a few years ago we were over visiting her in Sydney. Now, Australia has been run by, it's a neoliberal government or whatever. It's from Sydney. Myself and my wife went to Newcastle to visit some family. So what that involved was getting a boat from Manly to Sydney, getting an underground from the harbour to the train station, getting on the train, and it took 2.5 hours up the Murray Basin to get to Newcastle, met family, had lunch, got back on the train, got back on the underground, got back on the coach. It cost us $12, £6 for the entire, because there's a maximum spend on public transport in any day of $12, right? And that encourages people to use it. They're clean, they're efficient. It encourages people to get in and out of work. They have a tram system in Melbourne and Sydney. In the city centre, the tram system is free. You just jump on, jump off, and there's daily maximum. On Saturday and Sunday, Almas and myself were down in London meeting Jeremy Corbyn and various different people after that. On Sunday, we had to travel from London to Preston. That meant going from London to Sheffield to Manchester to Preston, and it cost me £96, and that was with a senior rail card, and it cost Almas over £100. It's a nonsense. We have hugely expensive public transport, and it's nothing to do with socialism or the left or whatever, because Australia, in Luxembourg, they have free public transport and it gets people around. It's good for the environment, it's cheap, it's efficient, it makes city centres usable. And if that's the option, then you don't need to use the car as much. Sometimes we need cars, of course. I'm not anti-car, but you can put those things forward in that way. Those are national government priorities, but it's crazy that we have got such expensive public transport in this country,
The
and
investment just isn't there.
needs addressing.
One last question for you, and actually, I should have asked this originally, so thank you, Small, for asking this question. With reforming control of the county council, how do you guys plan to contend with them making big cuts to services? They're going to claim their secondary services, but essentially essential services, using policies, claiming things as DI jobs, especially when in DI jobs are not just, we're not in America, not DI jobs to hire diverse. The diversity is very important because the diversity means that council can provide for people of all different backgrounds. My sister works in the NHS, and there's a big emphasis on cultural competence, but reform clearly made they're gonna tear these things away. How do you plan on responding? And do you think there's any hope that you can actually push back against these, or is it the majority just too big?
It's going to be difficult. But...
Yeah, look, it's a big task. It is going to be difficult. There's a couple of things. So the first thing is the guarantee. So what we can guarantee is that we will fight tooth and nail against any redundancies under any conditions under reform local council. That's whether that's no matter what those jobs are, we will fight against any redundancies whatsoever, and we will certainly fight tooth and nail against any targeting of DEI or any other specific types of jobs. Of course, it will be difficult because they have got such a huge majority. But what I would say is that we talked about voters from reform. I also think there are contradictions in those people who have been elected for reform. So in Lancashire, a layer of them were former Conservative councillors. And we should be clear, these are Tories in disguise, under the disguise of reform. That's one group. There's a second group who are a history of, if you like, BNP in disguise, or these are the fascists in disguise, or that's what they are, and they are part of that group. I'm not sure exactly the numbers, but they will be them. And then there's a third group who remain utterly confused as reform councillors now. Now, reform will be trying to harden them up. I think we've got a job and a responsibility to try and drive a wedge into them. I'll give you an example. Standing against Almas in her division for reform was an ex-GP. And some of our supporters questioned him how on earth can a GP be pro-reform given everything that they stand for? What do you say about the NHS? And he said, I love the NHS. I'm all for the NHS. I want more money into the NHS. So our people said, well, that's not what reform stands for. You're for privatisation. Oh, no, but I'm not. How would you pay for the NHS? I'm for increased taxes, he said. And we said, well, that's not what reform stand for.
Mm-hmm.
And these are their candidates,
Yeah.
right? So they were, some of them are right-wing Tories. Some of them have got an even more horrible history than that. But some of them don't. And they've very little experience. They're new to politics. They thought they were paper candidates and they've now been elected. And they're not clear about what they are. And if we can, we should try and drive a wedge into that and split as much as we possibly can. It's a big task.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying we'll be successful. Hopefully we will. But we've got to try. All we can do is try our best.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. There's lots more comments coming in, but I think you guys got to get going, and so do I. But last comment, which is not a question, but is well done to the Preston Independents in an oasis of hope in a swamp of fear. And that's truly how I feel, and that's why I want to talk to you today. And there are a lot of important questions here about local government services, etc. Maybe another day we will do an episode, and I'll get questions in solely focused on local government services and how people interact with them and what we believe the long-term solutions are. But for now, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.